Mom took my sister, Dad took my brother, and I left with a broken mask and no goodbye. Years later, they tried to come back into my life, but by then, I'd already built one without them. Imagine being 14, standing in a dim hallway, holding something precious you'd poured your heart into. And then, in one gut-wrenching moment, overhearing the voices that tear your world apart, realizing you're just baggage. That night, my parents decided my fate like I was furniture, and in their casual cruelty, they broke more than just my heart. The house was so quiet, but their voices sliced through the walls like invisible knives. I was just 14, my hands still sticky with flour paste, clutching a black cat mask I'd been making for Halloween. The newspaper strips were damp, clinging to my fingers like desperate, fragile promises. Through the sliver of light under the living room door, the cat's silver-lined eyes seemed to watch me, full of a pity I didn't understand yet. I wasn't supposed to hear them, but their words snaked under the door, wrapping around me like smoke. "You can take Hunter," my father's voice, solid and unyielding as the oak trees outside. "I'll keep Poppy." My mother's response, just as resolute. A pause. Then, her voice, softer this time, tired, utterly broken, and, "Coraline, let the court decide." I just stood there, staring at those silver eyes on my mask, the wet paste still sticky between my fingers. The newspaper strips had started to sag under their own weight, my creation's face drooping into a sorrow I hadn't intended. And in that instant, a cold, hard truth slammed into me. I didn't belong to anyone anymore. Our house in Salem was small, but it had always felt like ours. It had this unique smell, sawdust from my dad's woodshop mixing with the antiseptic scent from my mom's hospital shifts. In the evenings, these smells would mingle with whatever she was cooking, creating the scent I called home. My dad, Richard James, was a furniture maker when work came his way. His hands were rough, always peppered with tiny splinters he never seemed to notice. He could turn raw lumber into beautiful pieces, but lately, those hands were curled around beer bottles more often than chisels. My mom, Eliza, was an ER nurse, always exhausted. Her scrubs always smelled of bleach and stale coffee. She used to move with a quiet efficiency, but recently, everything about her felt hurried, especially when my dad was in the same room. My older brother, Hunter, was 16, the golden boy, football captain. He had this loud, infectious laugh and a smile that made adults forgive him anything. His room was a chaotic mix of trophies and dirty laundry. He could charm anyone, it seemed, except our own crumbling family. And then there was Poppy, my little sister, only 9. She was pure sweetness, wrapped up in ribbons and bedtime stories, collecting stuffed animals, naming each one after a flower. Her room was pink and yellow, filled with drawings of our family holding hands under smiling suns. In her world, we were always close, always together. And me? I was the quiet one, stuck somewhere in the middle, the girl with glue on her fingers, cutting up old newspapers to make something that felt alive. Papier-mâché was my secret language, a way to speak when words felt too heavy or too light. It made silence less suffocating. I'd tear strips of newspaper, mix flour and water until it was smooth. The paste would cling to my palms like hope, messy but holding everything together. I loved watching plain paper transform into something strong enough to become a face, a mask, a momentary identity. But that night, as I heard them divide their children like unwanted belongings at a garage sale, the paper face in my hands became something else, as fragile as the girl who made it. I crept back to my bedroom, closing the door so gently they wouldn't have heard it over their calm discussion of custody arrangements. I set the mask on my desk to dry, and that's when I noticed it, a tear, a small crater, where a tear of my own had fallen onto the still wet material. I didn't try to fix it. Some damage, I realized, felt too honest to repair. I slept with my window open, letting the cold October air pour in. Salem always has a strange charge in the air as Halloween approaches, but that night, it felt especially raw. I wondered if next Halloween, I'd even be here, if I'd be making masks at all. The next morning, my cat mask had dried, that teardrop divot still visible, right where its heart would be. A month later, The world stopped pretending we were a family. I sat in the Essex County Juvenile Court, my legs shaking so badly my heels clicked against the polished wood, the sound obscenely loud in the formal quiet. The air smelled of bitter coffee and stale paper. Dad sat on one side, Mom on the other. The physical distance between them was like a gaping canyon, making visible the chasm that had been growing for years. Hunter was next to Dad, his chin held high, already playing the grown-up who understood everything. Poppy wasn't there. Too young, they said. I wondered who was watching her, probably Aunt Ashley, Mom's sister, who always smelled like cinnamon gum and looked at me like she was trying to solve a complicated puzzle. The Department of Children and Families report was read aloud. I remember every clinical, detached word. Our family reduced to a failed experiment. Neither parent has presented a specific care plan for Coraline James, the social worker explained. The judge's voice was flat, devoid of sympathy, just procedure. I stared at her face, trying to see if she had children, if she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Since both parents failed to present a plan, the court grants temporary custody of the minor, Coraline James, to the Department of Children and Families. I looked around, desperate for someone, anyone, to look back at me. Mom's eyes were fixed on the floor, her sensible nurse's shoes still against the carpet. Dad checked his phone, as if a text could be more important than his daughter's fate. When the judge finally asked if I had anything to say, the words spilled out before I could stop them. I just want to be somewhere someone actually wants me. The silence that followed was my answer, a heavy, crushing confirmation. Miss Rodriguez, my DCF worker, waited for me with her clipboard and a kind, tired face that didn't quite match the moment. She'd only been assigned to my case days before, but somehow, she was already the most constant adult in my life. We went back to what was no longer my home so I could pack. Mom handed me an old canvas tote bag, soft and frayed from years of washing. She didn't say a single word as I moved through the bedroom that had been mine for 14 years. Poppy wasn't even there. Mom had sent her to Aunt Ashley's, as if my departure might contaminate her, make her wonder if she was next. I folded the few things I wanted to bring, a couple of t-shirts, jeans, my sketchbook, and that half-finished black cat mask. I left behind the posters, the books, everything too heavy for one bag or my heart. I looked at Miss Rodriguez, my voice barely a whisper, pleading. Can I please stay just one more night? Tomorrow's Halloween, and I want to see my little sister before I go. Please. She gave me a sympathetic look that said everything before she spoke. Sweetheart, I know this is hard, she said, her voice soft but firm. But there are so many other kids waiting for a place to stay. Come on now. She rested a gentle hand on my shoulder, and I followed her out. The sky began to drizzle as we walked to her car. Salem, in late October rain, isn't some picturesque postcard. It's gray, cold, unforgiving. My mask, in my canvas bag, wasn't fully covered, and at some point, the rain soaked through without me noticing. As Miss Rodriguez's car pulled away from the curb, I looked inside the bag. The paper had melted, edges curling like burned leaves. The silver paint had bled across the cat's face, half of it gone. I pressed what remained against my chest and whispered, words no one heard. Even the mask couldn't survive this. My first foster home was in Lynn, a small tan house that smelled of bleach and meatloaf. From the outside, it looked like any average family home, neatly trimmed lawn, American flag, seasonal wreath. But inside, it was a different story. The Carters ran their house like a military camp disguised as a family. Mr. Carter had never served, but he spoke about structure and discipline as if they were sacred texts. Mrs. Carter smiled too much and touched shoulders too often, her affection feeling oddly rehearsed. Lights out at 9, even weekends. No doors closed. Ever. No crying after lights out, it upset the younger kids. There were 3 other foster kids, plus the Carters owned 2 children. Their biological kids had private rooms, the rest of us shared. I was placed with Lacey, a 10-year-old who cried quietly into her pillow every night after Mrs. Carter's room checks. She'd been there 7 months and had mastered the art of silent tears. I kept my ruined mask and sketchbook hidden in a drawer under my bed. The mask was beyond repair, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. At night, when the house finally quieted, I'd take out my sketchbook and draw. Fox masks, wolf masks, faces with calm, knowing eyes, unlike any I'd seen in real life. I'd sketch them in pencil, then outline with the black pen I'd remembered to bring. I'd imagine the colors, the materials I'd layer if only I had them. On paper, I could still create worlds where faces transformed, where identities shifted. One afternoon, their teenage son, Brett, found my sketchbook when I was in the bathroom. When I returned, he was flipping through the pages, a mix of curiosity and contempt on his face. "What are you? Some kind of freak? Gonna wear a different mask every day?" He laughed, holding the book just out of my reach. I yanked it back, maybe a little too forcefully. My hand brushed his, and he let out an exaggerated yelp of pain, followed by a sly, taunting grin. By dinner, Mr. Carter had called DCF. The report said I had trouble adjusting and exhibited aggressive behavior toward the biological children. Miss Rodriguez didn't sound convinced when she called to tell me she'd be coming the next day, but it didn't matter. The decision was made. 1 month, 2 homes. When Miss Rodriguez arrived, clipboard in hand, those gentle eyes now sadly familiar, I didn't pack much. My ruined mask, my sketchbook, a few clothes. Before I left, Lacey grabbed my hand in the hallway, her small fingers cold against mine. "Don't go," she whispered, her eyes wide and damp. "When people leave, nobody ever comes back." I knelt beside her, feeling far older than my 14 years. "I'll come back," I said, knowing it was a lie, but it was something to hold on to. Something that made me feel like I existed beyond that moment, that I could leave a trace of myself that mattered. Miss Rodriguez waited patiently by the door, pretending not to hear. When I joined her, she squeezed my shoulder. "Sometimes the first placement isn't the right fit," she said as we got into her car. "We'll find somewhere better." I didn't answer. I was learning that silence was safer than hope. The second house had 6 beds, all filled. It was a large, peeling Victorian in Peabody, its grandeur long faded, but you could still see it in the curved staircase and high ceilings. The Davenports smiled a lot when the social worker visited, but their smiles were thin and never reached their eyes. They took in 5 foster kids for the stipends, treating us more like tenants than family. I slept on the top bunk above Trisha, a 16-year-old who'd been in the system since she was 7. She taught me the unwritten rules on my first night. Don't leave anything valuable out. Lock your backpack. Allowance is $30 a month, but they'll cut it in half if you miss curfew, even by a minute. Don't ask for seconds. And definitely, don't get attached to anything or anyone. The Davenports were efficient, not cruel. We had clean clothes, regular meals, a roof. What we didn't have was warmth, conversation, or the sense that we were anything more than obligations. I kept making masks in secret, using torn magazines from the recycling bin, cereal boxes, paste made from flour, and water borrowed from the kitchen when no one was looking. I couldn't risk the mess papier-mâché usually created, so I worked late at night, wiping up every drop, collecting every scrap. These masks were smaller, simpler, but they were mine, created in the narrow space between obligation and sleep. I tried calling Mom once, 3 weeks after I left. It went to voicemail. Her recorded voice sounded happier than I remembered, instructing me to leave a message. I hung up without speaking. Dad said he'd call me back after his job site wrapped up. He never did. Only Poppy remembered. One day, Miss Rodriguez brought a small Halloween card she'd sent through DCF. It was store-bought, but inside, in her careful 3rd-grade handwriting, a little black cat drawing next to the printed message read, "I miss you. Will you be home next Halloween? Love, Poppy." I spent 3 weeks saving part of my allowance to buy a cheap card at CVS. I drew a silver cat inside it and wrote, "I miss you too. Maybe next Halloween." It was a lie, but a soft one. The kind you tell because the truth would hurt too much. I had no idea where I'd be next Halloween, or if I'd ever be home again. November slid into December, then January. Winter in Massachusetts is unforgiving, but at least it matched how I felt inside. Frozen, waiting for a thaw that seemed impossible. By February, I had started at my third school in 4 months. Each time, I clutched my schedule, navigating hallways where everyone else seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I ate lunch alone, drawing in my sketchbook, creating faces that always looked back at me. In March, the Davenports told Miss Rodriguez they couldn't continue to meet my needs. I hadn't caused trouble. I'd barely spoken. But sometimes, silence is its own kind of demand. Or maybe it was just that I never made any mistakes for them to take my allowance away. Miss Rodriguez appeared again, clipboard in hand, her gentle eyes now utterly familiar. "I'm sorry, Coraline," she said. "We're going to try somewhere else." 3 months, 3 homes. I was beginning to understand. Some people aren't meant to stick. After the Davenports filed a non-compliance report, DCF decided to transfer me to a youth shelter. Miss Rodriguez tried her best to comfort me, but comfort wasn't what I needed anymore. 3 months later, Miss Rodriguez showed up at the shelter with something I hadn't seen in her eyes before: hope. "Coraline," she said, sitting with me on the front porch steps, away from the noise inside. "We found a pre-adoptive home for you." She emphasized the words carefully. "They live in Salem. They've been approved and are excited to meet you. Back to Salem." The word made something flutter in my chest, not quite hope, but a spark of recognition. The place where it all started. "Who are they?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dr. Miguel Garcia is a pediatrician at North Shore Children's Hospital. His wife, Lucia, is an art teacher at Collins Middle School. They have a son, Julian, who's away at his first year of college. They've been thinking about adoption for a while." An art teacher. The words echoed in my mind, opening a door I thought had been sealed shut forever. The next day, Miss Rodriguez drove me to Salem. The trees were just beginning to turn, spots of red and gold appearing among the green. Salem in autumn has a particular magic that even my grief couldn't fully dim. The Garcias lived in a blue colonial on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Their house wasn't huge, but it had a wraparound porch with actual rocking chairs, like something from a movie about small-town America. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, creating a gentle melody in the breeze. The house smelled like cinnamon and turpentine, an unusual combination that somehow worked perfectly. The living room walls were covered in paintings, bold colors, movement, landscapes, people, abstract emotions. They even had a cat, a sleepy orange tabby named Mango, who regarded me with lazy interest from his perch on the windowsill. Dr. Garcia, who immediately asked me to call him Miguel, had kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses and a smile that formed slowly, as if he wanted it to mean something. Mrs. Garcia, please call me Lucia, had paint-stained fingernails and silver streaked through her dark hair. They both looked at me directly when they spoke, not through me or around me like so many adults had. That first night, Lucia brought hot chocolate to my room, not the instant kind, but thick and rich, made with real melted chocolate and cinnamon. She sat on the edge of the bed they'd prepared for me, decorated with a quilt in shades of blue and green. "We're not trying to replace anyone," she said, her voice accented but clear. "We just want you to feel safe here, and maybe, if you decide you want to stay, we could become a family together. But there's no rush, Coraline. No pressure." The words were so simple they hurt, because after months of being shuffled from place to place, the idea that I might have a choice felt almost too monumental to comprehend. The next morning, Lucia showed me her art classroom in the basement. It was a huge space with concrete floors painted in swirling patterns of blue and gold. Easels stood in one corner, a pottery wheel in another. Shelves lined the walls, filled with clay, brushes, bins of colored paper, and jars of paint. When she handed me a bowl of paste, simple flour and water mixed to a smooth consistency, the smell hit me like a memory. "Miguel mentioned you make masks," she said. "Is that still something you enjoy?" I nodded, surprised he'd remembered that detail from whatever file Miss Rodriguez had shared. Lucia smiled. "Then this room is yours too, whenever you want it." That weekend, I made another cat mask. Papier-mâché again, the first time since that night in the hallway. I built it carefully, layer by layer, smoothing the edges with my fingers, feeling the familiar texture of wet paper becoming something solid. This time, I deliberately created a design that acknowledged the damage. I rebuilt the torn one from my memory, but instead of hiding the fracture, I smoothed the ruined side with a layer of silver paint, not to hide the rip, but to honor it. A line of fracture turned beautiful. When it dried, I hung it on the wall of my new room. Looking at it, I realized it was the first thing I'd made in months that felt wholly mine. Not stolen time or borrowed materials, but something created without fear. That was the first time I thought maybe broken things could still be kept. The Garcias didn't push. They offered routine without rigidity, presence without pressure. Miguel came home for dinner almost every night, sharing stories about his young patients. Lucia talked about art and her students, asking about my day without demanding details I wasn't ready to share. They invited me to video calls with Julian, their son, who was studying engineering at MIT. He showed me his dorm room, introduced his roommate, asked about what I was reading or drawing. Never once did he suggest I was taking his place or invading his home. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to unfold. I spoke more at dinner. I spent hours in Lucia's studio basement, creating not just masks, but sculptures, paintings, collages. I started doing homework at the kitchen table instead of hiding in my room. Miss Rodriguez visited regularly, her clipboard still present but less prominent. Each time, she asked if I was happy here. Each time, my answer became more certain. Yes, I finally told her for months after arriving. I want to stay. The process wasn't simple. There were court dates, paperwork, evaluations. The system that had moved me around so easily now seemed determined to question the one place I wanted to remain. But the Garcias never wavered. They attended every hearing, completed every form, answered every question. They were willing to fight for me in a way no one had before. When I turned 15, a letter arrived in the mail. My name was written in familiar handwriting, sharp and controlled, just like my mother's nursing notes had always been. Miguel handed me the envelope at breakfast, his expression carefully neutral. You don't have to read it now or ever if you don't want to. I took it to my room, where I sat cross-legged on the bed, the envelope heavy in my hands. Mango jumped up beside me, purring loudly as if offering moral support. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, with my mother's name embossed at the top. She'd remarried. David Connors, a hospital manager she'd met at work, with a 10-year-old son from his previous marriage. They were settling in as a family in a new house in Marblehead. The letter was cordial, almost like a holiday update you'd send to distant relatives. She asked how I was doing in school, mentioned that Poppy was taking ballet lessons. There was no explanation for why she'd chosen one child over another, no acknowledgement of the months of silence, just neatly penned sentences creating the illusion of connection. At the bottom, she'd written, "We'd love to hear from you when you're ready." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it under my pillow. That night, I lay awake feeling it beneath my head, this thin paper connection to the woman who had once been the center of my world. The next morning, I asked Lucia if I could use her fancy stationery, the kind with watercolor flowers along the edges. I wrote back to my mother, my handwriting less controlled, but my words equally measured. I told her about the Garcias, about my new school, about the masks I was making again. I asked if I could visit for Halloween. She wrote back 2 weeks later, "We're still adjusting to our new family dynamic, sweetheart. Maybe next year would be better." A few weeks after that, Dad called. His voice sounded the same, that warm timbre that used to read me bedtime stories. He was getting married to Rebecca Moore, his high school sweetheart before he'd met my mother. She had twin daughters, 11 years old. He said Hunter had been accepted into college. When I asked if I could visit for Halloween, he hesitated. I could hear his breath catch over the line. "Rebecca thinks adding another teen might confuse her girls right now," he said finally. "You understand, right, kiddo?" I did. They had new families now, and I was just something from before, a reminder of a failed attempt. That night, I cried for the first time since coming to the Garcias. Not the silent tears I'd mastered in foster care, but loud, gulping sobs that I couldn't contain. Lucia found me curled on my bed, clutching my pillow to my chest. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside me, her hand on my back, steady and warm. She stayed until the sobs subsided into hiccups, until my breathing steadied. Sometimes, she said finally, the people who should love us most aren't capable of it. Not because of anything we did or didn't do, but because of what's broken inside them. She touched my cheek gently. That doesn't mean you're unlovable, Coraline. It just means they couldn't see how wonderful you are. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not healing, that would take much longer, but a recognition that the hole inside me wasn't my shape. It was theirs. By 16, I had lived with the Garcias for more than a year. The court had extended the pre-adoptive placement, with permanent adoption awaiting one final hearing. I had begun to think of their house as home, of my room as mine, of Miguel and Lucia as more than temporary guardians. October in Salem glowed again. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches, fake cobwebs stretched across bushes, laughter echoed down streets crowded with early tourists seeking witchy thrills. I dressed as a silver witch that Halloween, with a mask I'd made myself, papier-mâché, covered in silver leaf, transforming my face into something ethereal and otherworldly. The Garcias hosted a party for the neighborhood kids, and I spent the evening painting faces, transforming little ones into tigers and butterflies and zombies. Their giggles filled the air like music, their trust as they tilted their faces toward my brush, a gift I hadn't known I wanted. But I still avoided that corner, the one where my old house stood. I couldn't look at it. Some ghosts don't need faces, they just sit quietly in your chest, making themselves known in moments of unexpected silence. When I got home, exhausted but happy, Miguel and Lucia called me into the living room. They were sitting together on the sofa, holding hands. On the coffee table, an iPad screen glowed with Julian's face, calling from college, his expression serious. Miguel cleared his throat, his usually steady voice trembling slightly. Coraline, we wanted to tell you together, if you're willing. He glanced at Lucia, who nodded encouragingly. We'd like to adopt you. Officially. To make you part of our family permanently. Julian smiled through the screen. I'd love to have a sister like you, if you want that too. For a second, I couldn't breathe. No one had ever said they wanted me. Not like that. Not as a choice, rather than an obligation. I looked at their faces, these three people who had no reason to love me except that, somehow, they did. Miguel with his kind eyes behind those wire frames. Lucia with paint perpetually under her fingernails. Julian with his easy acceptance. I cried, but it felt different this time, not the kind that burns, but the kind that cleanses. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. I want that too. That Halloween, I became Coraline Garcia. Well, not officially. The paperwork would take months. But in my heart, in that moment, I chose a family who had already chosen me. The adoption process took months, but it felt like time had finally learned to move in the right direction. There were meetings with lawyers, court appearances, mountains of paperwork. My birth parents were contacted for final consent. They signed a voluntary surrender without contesting. The court added 6 months of supervision before finalizing. When the judge asked me if I agreed to the adoption, I said yes. My voice didn't shake. My birth parents weren't there, of course. But Poppy sent a letter, decorated with a small cat doodle in the corner. You'll always be the bravest sister I know. Love forever, Poppy. I kept it in my sketchbook, next to a photo of my new family, Miguel, Lucia, Julian, and me, standing in front of the courthouse on the day the judge approved the pre-adoption agreement. We were all smiling, but mine was the widest. My face open in a way it hadn't been in years. High school became a place I belonged, rather than just pass through. I joined the art club, made friends who came over to the house and seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. I started helping Lucia with her after-school art program for elementary students, teaching them how to make simple masks from paper plates and found objects. I applied to art schools with Lucia's encouragement, my portfolio filled with masks and sculptures and paintings that told stories of transformation. When acceptance letters arrived from RISD, MassArt, and Parsons, the Garcias hosted a celebration dinner with a cake Lucia had decorated to look like an artist's palette. I chose mass art, close enough to visit home regularly but far enough to feel like a new beginning. Julian, now in his final year at MIT, helped me move into my dorm, carrying boxes and assembling furniture with the easy companionship of a brother who had never questioned my place in his family. College opened worlds I hadn't imagined. I discovered I loved sculpture beyond masks, working with clay and metal and wood. I learned techniques from professors who pushed me to expand my vision, to see art as not just personal expression but conversation. But masks remained my first love, my signature. I experimented with materials: leather, fabric, wire mesh, found objects. Each creation was both hiding place and revelation, concealment and disclosure. In my junior year, a professor submitted my work to a student exhibition at a small gallery in Boston's South End. 3 of my masks were accepted, a series I called Transformations, each representing a stage of becoming. The night of the opening, the Garcias came, all 3 of them, dressed up, beaming with pride. They stood beside me as visitors examined my work, as strangers asked about my inspiration, my process, my vision. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent," someone told Lucia. She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with pride, "she does." "Your daughter." The words settled over me like a blessing. Boston smells different from Salem, busier, sharper, like concrete after rain and coffee and possibility. At 25, I run a small studio tucked between a bakery and a thrift shop in Jamaica Plain. The space isn't huge, but the windows face east, filling it with morning light that makes even the messiest works in progress look magical. The sign above the door reads, "Paper Souls, Masks and Art" by Coraline Garcia. I create commissioned pieces, masks for theater productions, installations for corporate lobbies. But every Saturday, I teach classes for children, showing them how to make masks from recycled paper and flour paste, just like I did at 14. Their hands get sticky, their laughter loud as they transform simple materials into faces that delight or frighten or intrigue. Sometimes, they talk about the families they'll go home to, and I listen, happy for them. Sometimes, one of them stays quiet, working alone while the others chatter. Those are the ones I help most gently, kneeling beside them, offering guidance without demand. We make faces together, not to hide behind, but to show who we wish we could be, who we might become when we're ready. Every year, I send Poppy a new mask, different each time. One made of gold leaf, one painted with twilight blue, one woven from copper wire that catches the light like flame. Each is a promise that we are still connected, still sisters despite the years and miles and different last names. She's in college now, studying psychology at UMass Amherst. We meet for coffee when she's home on breaks, these visits growing less awkward with time. She tells me about our mother, who divorced David Connors after 3 years. About our father, who seems happy with Rebecca and her daughters. About Hunter, now working in finance in New York, married with a baby on the way. I listen, asking questions, genuinely interested in these people who share my blood, if not my daily life. Occasionally, I see flashes of longing in Poppy's eyes, wondering, perhaps, what it would have been like if our family had remained whole, if I had stayed. I don't share that longing. What broke gave me what I needed, even if the breaking hurt. This October, a package arrived from Poppy. She's 20 now, grown up, and a laugh that still sounds like the little sister I once tucked into bed. The box came with a note, open on Halloween night. I waited, just like she asked. That night, the Garcias came over for dinner. Lucia brought empanadas made from her grandmother's recipe. Miguel carved a pumpkin that looked suspiciously like our cat Mango. Julian, visiting from California, where he now works as an engineer, brought wine and stories about his latest project. We ate, we laughed, we told the same old story about the night I spilled paste all over their carpet trying to create a papier-mâché phoenix that was too ambitious for my skills. The memory, once embarrassing, now felt like a treasured family legend. When they left, promising to return for brunch on Sunday, I opened Poppy's package. Inside was a silver papier-mâché cat mask, the edges uneven, the paint a little thick in places. It wasn't perfect, clearly the work of someone who hadn't made many masks before, but it was beautiful in its sincerity. There was a card tucked underneath. This year I made my own silver cat mask. I was thinking of you. I hung it on my studio wall, right beside the one I'd made at 16, the one that had once been broken, then transformed by silver paint into something more honest. Standing before these two masks, one made by me, one made for me, I whispered words into the empty room. You're always here with me. I believed it completely. Sometimes, customers ask about the name of my studio, Paper Souls. I tell them paper is fragile when it's a single sheet, but when layered carefully with the right adhesive, it becomes stronger than anyone expects. That's how people are, too, I tell them. Layer by layer, we build ourselves into something that can withstand the world's rough handling. When my students peel their dried masks off the molds, the room fills with exclamations of surprise and delight, a chorus of voices discovering that they've created something substantial from materials that seemed insufficient. It's a sound I once thought I'd lost forever, a reminder that joy can be found in the most unexpected transformations. Every Halloween, when the Garcias visit my studio, we hang our new creations side by side, mine, silver and steady, after years of practice, Lucia's, vibrant and bold with the confidence of a lifelong artist, Miguel's, meticulously detailed with the precision of a doctor's hands, Julian's, engineered with clever mechanisms that make the masks move or change with light. And now, Poppy's, tentative but sincere, joining our gallery of faces. Sometimes I wonder what my birth parents would think if they saw this wall of masks, this visual history of a family built rather than born. I doubt they would understand. Some people never learn to see beyond the cracks to the beauty that might emerge from them. I've learned that family isn't about who you start with, it's who stays to help you repair the mask when it breaks. It's who sees your cracks and scars and doesn't turn away, but instead shows you how to incorporate them into something more complex, more interesting, more true. At 30, I received an invitation to Hunter's daughter's first birthday party, my niece, a concept both strange and wonderful. I sent a small mask, appropriate for a child's room, crafted from soft felt and ribbon. A silver cat, of course. The tradition continues. I didn't attend the party. Some distances can't be bridged with a single gesture. But I included my phone number with the gift. An opening, if not yet a door. Hunter called a week later. His voice deeper than I remembered, but with that same confident cadence. Coraline, he said. She loves it. It's hanging above her crib. We talked for almost an hour. Awkward at first, then easier. He asked about my art, my studio. I asked about his daughter, his wife, his life in New York. Neither of us mentioned our parents. Some silences are agreements, not omissions. Before we hung up, he said, I should have done more, back then. I was just a kid too, but I should have done something. We all should have, I answered. But we're doing something now. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. A new layer added to an old form. When I was 14, standing in that hallway with a damp papier-mâché mask in my hands, I couldn't have imagined the life I have now. I couldn't have known that being discarded would lead me to being chosen. That the fracture would create space for something stronger to grow. No one gets to decide your worth just because they walked away. Love isn't bound by blood. It's made by the people who stay, who see your cracks and choose to hold you anyway. If you were me, would you have forgiven them? Would you have gone back or stayed with the ones who chose you? Because for me, the answer is simple. I'm Coraline Garcia. And this is the mask I repaired. Not the paper one that crumbled in the rain all those years ago, but the one I wear on my face every day. The identity I've crafted from the pieces of myself that survived, layer by layer, tear by tear, choice by choice. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful. It's strong. And most importantly, it's mine. As I close my studio each night, turning off the lights that shine on dozens of masks created by my students and myself, I often think about that 14-year-old girl, standing in a hallway with a damp creation in her hands, overhearing the words that would change everything. I wish I could tell her that the breaking wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a different one. A story about how sometimes we have to lose the masks others made for us before we can create the ones that truly fit. And as I walk home through the autumn-scented streets, I carry this truth like a talisman. There is no wound so deep that art cannot reach it. No fracture so complete that love cannot bridge it. And no mask so broken that it cannot be transformed into something more beautiful than what came before. That is the inheritance I've claimed for myself. That is the legacy I'll pass on. That is the mask I repaired.